So hello everyone, good morning for myself, good afternoon for you all. When I had learned about this talk, this conference, I was really hoping to be able to join you in Poland. It's a place I've never been before. So this is the first time actually I'm giving a conference in a country that I've never been to. And usually I like to, learn a little bit more about the culture, learn some of the language, but I couldn't do it with Polish. It was a little bit harder than I could manage. So welcome everyone and thank you for having me. So we have some time together, and contrary to what you might think for a public speaker, I don't actually like to hear myself talking. So we have a good amount of time set up for us today, and I'll be talking about the future, almost the future of Agile. I want to give almost like the state of evidence-based management at scrum.org. So what we've been thinking about from the enterprise and leadership area, and take you through the journey. I've been here for 8 years of where we've evolved with this framework called evidence-based management, why we started it, what does it look like, and where we're going from now, and then how organizations and your roles in organizations, what should we be thinking about, or what could we be thinking about as we move forward, especially in the United States. We're in a time more than ever where we can't expect that tomorrow will be like today. So that's why we're always reading our news in the United States. But there's more to the world than just the US, as we know. So what does success look like for an organization? Before we get into that, just a little bit more about me. So I am in the enterprise solutions and leadership space at scrum.org. Scrum.org is created by Ken Schwaber, who's the co-creator of Scrum. So what generally we're looking at is whatever is working great at the team level, what does that mean for the organization? How does that look? And what are some things that we can help there? It's a lot of inspection and adaptation for us. If you've heard of the Nexus Framework, that's something that we worked on a lot 3, 4, 5 years ago now. And that was something that I worked on heavily. I'm also a mentor for younger people around 18 to 21, not specifically people who are into in our space, in the Agile space and technology, but really people who are underserved and need opportunity. So really trying to work with them to expose them and give them opportunity. I'm an organizational behavior person, but in my professional career, like most good Asian Americans in the United States, I started out through banking. So if you're not a doctor, usually you're working for a bank. My career evolved. I worked at a startup. I've done a lot of corporate stuff, and eventually, like most other people, my back was against the wall. I learned about Agile and Scrum, and I haven't turned from that ever since. So Scrum.org, I had the opportunity to join 8 years ago, and one of the reasons that I joined was because Ken Schwaber, the man up on the right, was working on something called CIF, the Continuous Improvement Framework. And what I'm hoping to show you today is how it's really come full circle. So when we talked about continuous improvement framework, and Andy and a lot of other professional Scrum trainers would be familiar with this, who've been around longer, was really looking at how could we use Scrum to improve the organization, and how could we use that to think about continuous improvement. And I think that at that time, that conversation and some of the things we had was a little bit too early. And the scaling conversation started to happen, right? So everybody said, wow, this is so good. Scrum is so great. We got to run to scale, right? And what happened was what resonated with people when we talked about continuous improvement was this notion of, if we're continuous improving and you're doing all these things at an organizational level, what is that moment that you're using to inspect and actually adapt, to actually improve? And that's where the genesis of evidence-based management came from. So when we said evidence-based, right? So evidence-based review or something like that, that started to make sense with people, maybe I want to say even more like 5 years ago, where they said, you know what, we're doing this, we're spending a lot of money. How do we know that that's happened? So that's kind of the story that we're going to start from here, how we said, you know what, let's talk to people where we can, and then we'll move on from there. But Scrum.org, we're a mission-based company working to improve the profession of software delivery, training, education, certification, community. As many of you may know, nowadays what we look like is a lot more like this. So really like this community. So this is beginning of March, mid-March, April. This is about the time where we started to think about how can we work differently? How can we work differently? So this is really just a different side of, the things that were great when we were working together here, and now we're actually looking like this, just the community coming together, trying to figure out how we can still work and engage with each other. So like I said, we started with CIF, Continuous Improvement Framework, and we were thinking about organizations that are rushing to Agile and Scrum. They've heard great things about it in some pockets, or they go to a conference, and it's been more than a decade that organizations have been rushing that way, right? And actually, this was coined by a fellow Pole, Tomek Balderek, and he called it a Scrum PED. So it's really these organizations, these people, they're running and they're saying, you know what, we must do Scrum, we must do Agile, and now we have to scale it. We need to do that now. What do we need to do? And we say, okay, let's do that. So the organization says, we're going Agile, because an executive says, all right, I've seen something good going on there. Let's see how we can make that happen. And that's really normal, actually, from a scaling perspective when you think about it. So what happens generally when you're looking at an organization is they say, hey, there's this bit that's nimble, fast and nimble. And what happens is that there's also this part of an organization that is not, right? The established part of the organization. So when you see that, when you say, hey, they're going Agile, we need to innovate more, let's scale that. They put process on that to try to make that spread throughout the organization. So the irony of that is when that happens, they start to use a waterfall approach, or a very segmented approach to try to implement Agile in a series of steps. And that's because traditional organizations are generally people, right, are looking for certainty. So they're going to organize using a plan. So what they want to do, and I still see this today, I'm talking to organizations that are saying, yes, 10,000 people, we need to do this. We need to do this with precision. We're going to train all of our people, and we need a bunch of teams. And each of those teams, let's make sure that we have coaches, product owners, and Scrum Masters, whatever those roles are. Let's make sure that we have that, right? Get the checklist. And we're going to all march toward the goal of adopting Agile. So when we look at that, when I talked about there's an Agile part of the organization or an innovative part of an organization, we're going to scale that, right, so that we can apply process to that. And the goal here is to adopt Agile. What happens is that big part of the organization, it's being pushed, right? Now it's saying, you're big, you become process oriented, you need to innovate. And the goal to try to mesh these two things together, the goal usually is adopt Agile. And that's a questionable goal. And the milestone of when we hit success, when we have progress, is where we know that we're on plan, is when success is met, usually of all these different criteria. So this was really interesting to us because we've been looking at all these things, and you could give me some tangible numbers when we look at what's on the screen here. When we were starting that conversation around continuous improvement framework, when we're talking about whatever, enterprise Scrum, it had so many names. But when we're talking about evidence-based management, what we were really trying to figure out is, what are those, it's almost like two loops. What are the two dimensions where we can tangibly see that we're improving, as teams, that we're getting better, and that has value for the organization? This is a little bit off when I think about that, right? So how do we tangibly know if we're moving the needle on business objectives? Not that we're becoming more agile, I'm not sure what that means, but if we're actually moving the needle when we're trying to say, here are our goals, our priorities are changing, we're able to meet that, and we're pivoting quickly. All things that are in the nature of what it means to have an agile organization, a mindset, and things that are becoming more than ever important now. So organizations, I promise you guys might be in them, they're still going through this. It might be a little bit slower now, but I'm certainly hearing that and based from different countries, it will still look like this. So, all right, we're going to go Agile. We have a plan. We're going to move forward with it, and we'll know that we're successful when we meet this plan. All right. What could possibly go wrong? So your executive comes back, the person who asked for, this transformation, and says, "Are we Agile yet?" And what do you say? And the real question here isn't really, are we Agile yet, right? The real question here is, I'm spending money. What are we getting for it? Are we better from the money that we've spent on this? And again, we've seen some good things happen here, put a bunch of money into the organization. We're going to train up this way. Are we Agile yet? What do you show? And the people who are coaching through this, or the people who've been responsible for this, if you're a part of this, there's a lot of good intentions from all different areas, right? There's good intentions from, management who's seeing this going on and saying, we need to become more agile. There's good intentions from the people who are implementing it, and good intentions, hopefully, from the teams. Whether or not you're happy about it, doesn't matter, but everybody's, trying their best generally, right? And so what is interesting is that when we're stuck in that, we're in that traditional mindset, we start to look at different measurements that we're used to reporting on and using that to gauge progress. And so these are based off of real stories. When I was talking to organizations about, well, what are you showing? How are you getting better? You got Scrum teams, you got a Nexus, that's great. What does it look like? And no joke, they would say, our predictability is going up. It's now 99% now. It's in the 90s. It used to be in the 40s. And so if I think about, what you measure and what that says about your mindset, we have to kind of do that coach whisper, right? And there's this desire to be able to say, we need to accurately plan. This could be a product owner, this could be management, but this is a real conversation that I've had. And when you read into that, the interesting thing goes, are people screwing up if they're not predictable? Am I screwing up if I'm not predictable? And predictions, it's really interesting because we're talking about money here, but there's also this notion of time. There's all these artificial things that push us to react in certain ways. From a team level, I've heard, we're doing really great. Agile is really working for us. Our transformation is great. Our velocity has not even fallen. Our velocity, how is that possible? But our velocity is through the roof. It's really great. It's not falling. You have to say, how is that possible? Are people machines? We're humans, right? So we're not just operating all the same time, all the same way, especially if our environment changes. And you have to say, hey, what is being gained here? Is the team scared? And that's why what's important to me is really looking at that evidence of value. So that notion of show me actually what you're contributing to a value conversation. So again, what you measure really reveals a lot about your mindset. And when we think about that, you're all familiar with this notion of the observer effect, right? So when we think about if we're gold on something, if we have a target, it's going to drive our behavior to match that generally, right? So the thing is that when we're trying to drive people's actions and behaviors, and we're trying as human beings to be as least complicated as possible, we're driving ourselves towards things like velocity. Okay, Patricia, so you know what? If it's not velocity, what is it? And that's what we'll get into. So remember that using progress as your main guide can be misleading. And this notion right here is really important, and it's said all the time, you guys are familiar with, but this is really the nut of business agility. So when we're using progress and we're misaligned from a business and delivery organization, or just even as a business, what happens is that we could potentially be creating solutions that are disconnected from the outcomes and the value that we want to deliver for our customers, what our customers or what people actually want. We start to get locked into the bureaucracy in the organization even harder when we start to think about the estimates and all the other things that we have to predict, right? And so what happens is that everything gets locked. So it's locked, estimates are locked in conjecture, we have risk, right? And that's gonna get amplified. And it's all because of this nut where we're misaligned. So we get lost here, we're staying the same here. In terms of a cost center, we're looking at these things. And what happens is that obviously when you're a cost center, you say, where can I save some money? Why aren't you doing that, right? It's creating that sort of culture. All right, and that's the traditional culture, that's the way that we've been. And maybe organizations have really amplified and really have changed since then. There's some people that are super lucky, haven't experienced that. And there's some people that came through that because that's the way organizations are. But where do we move forward from here? So if we think about this notion of agility, agility is about efficiency, is not about efficiency, it's about effectiveness. And what does that really mean? So, all right, people get it. So we've been jamming this conversation for years about value, right? So we talk about value, value, value. We have books, we have the product owner role, we think about value. As a team, we think about value, and all these things are changing to drive that conversation toward value. 2017, this report used to show that when we measured success, we would talk about story points, we would talk about velocity, we would talk about all sorts of output and progress related things. And now 2020, what we see here is that when people and organizations were saying for projects, how do we gauge value? How do we gauge success? 46% are saying we gauge it by business value. Cool. So in this survey from the State of Agile report this year, organizations were able to go through and check off and click multiple ways of how they gauge success. And so business value, customer satisfaction on top, that's cool. 37% velocity, 31% budget versus actual cost. And actually, as you go down this report, if you haven't seen it, I think the next ones are planned versus actual story, planned versus actual budget, those kind of things. But we see business value and customer satisfaction, that's awesome. The next conversation happened. Okay, so we have people and we're thinking about value now. We understand that, we want to use that as success. And they go, well, what do we really mean by value? Right? What do we really mean by value? And last year, the year before, we would say, well, when you're thinking about value, what makes an organization able to sustain itself versus an organization that cannot? What is the difference between an organization that has been able to sustain and become a leader? And, we can have another conversation about Amazon, but what's the difference between, for instance, the Amazons and the BlackBerries, right? And we've had this conversation about value. And if I asked you to think about a company, that has been able to sustain itself, and a company that would hold itself back, like I asked a lot of people, and when we do different types of conversations and workshops, you would probably tell me, well, they were focused on customer. That's what really helped them think about, the future. They didn't only look internally, they looked externally. They thought about how could they release faster? What was their ability to innovate? How could they do things and have a flexible system? Were they agile? Maybe their time to market is just a lot better, right? They didn't bloat up everything. So the things that would push companies and have them sustain are a little bit different, and their ability to innovate and pivot is different. It's really interesting, even when we think about in the United States, there are some organizations, actually some, let's just say restaurants. Why is it that some restaurants have been able to sustain and some restaurants have not? As you know, like we're all still locked in, essentially. I'm in the Burlington office today. Actually, Scrum was created downstairs from where I'm sitting right now. But why is it that some organizations have been able to move forward and some have not, right? And so when we think about, well, they've been thinking about their customers, they've been thinking about they were thinking about how to innovate, they were really talking to other people. When you break that down, that's how we came up with the 4 key value areas of the evidence-based management framework. So this evidence-based management framework says, think about measuring value. Think about how business value and agility are aligned. Now, if you're looking at this with me, current value, when I'm looking at it, it's on the top right-hand corner. That's saying, where are you now as an organization? That unrealized value is, what is it when you look outside of your own organization? What's going on out there? Is there value that we should be capturing? Is there opportunity that we should be capturing? And that is looking at it from a market perspective. Okay, well, there's opportunity and we understand where we are present day, we understand future value. Can we actually deliver? Can we actually create any of those things? Can we fulfill any of that stuff? And that's our time to market and our ability to innovate. And what we said was, consider these things holistically, right? Because a lot of the times we're just focused, let's just say time to market, and we're not looking at how that relates to other things. Can we look at those things and make a relationship together? So current value might have something like, let's just say customer satisfaction. If you're increasing your time to market, does that also have some sort of tick on the customer satisfaction point? Behind these key value areas, and this is all in the evidence-based management guide, like Scrum Guide, it's free and open to everyone. We have an appendix of key value metrics suggested, right? So any organization, or if you're in marketing or doing something else, they will mean different things to you, but within that document, there's different measurements that you could look. So that's something where you could dig in if you're really thinking about measurements right now. Those are just suggested from us. But if you look into those things, usually what I'll ask when I'm working with a client is they'll say, you know what, Patricia, we're really, really looking at improving our defect density. And we'll say, why? And they'll say, well, because we're located in this area and we do a lot of outsourcing work, and customers don't want to work with us because they think their quality is low. That's great. Are you tracking it? Yes, I'm tracking it. And what we've also seen is that the customer numbers are going up. That's great, right? That's the holistic point of view that we're trying to make. So if I go briefly into each one of these key value areas, current value, you might have some different measures that look like this, right? Customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, revenue, right? Assigning a dollar, a euro, or some sort of monetary value to it. And we're looking again at the value that's delivered to your customers and stakeholders today. And the questions that we're really thinking about are, how happy are your users and customers? How happy are your employees? What about your stakeholders? What about the investors, right? What does this look like in terms of your current value as an organization, as a product? You might even look at it from a team level. However, that's where you are today. Then we said, all right, this notion of unrealized value, and again, these are only suggested, there are more or less in the EBM guide. Unrealized value says, what is that gap? Should we close it, right? And it asks us to think about how much value is enough, and is it worth the effort and risk to fulfill that, right? And so that unrealized value might be something that's in the market, something around the product, something around satisfying our customers. Can any more money be made? And where are we? So if we have low unrealized value, that means there's not a lot of opportunity. If there's large unrealized value, it means there's a lot for us to do. So a startup might have a lot of unrealized value, but they might be a little bit lower on their current value. So all these, again, that kind of holistic thinking. Time to market, I think, is highly misunderstood. So we often focus on time to market. And again, you'll see some of these measures here. There's some interesting ones like time to learn. We've just added something like time to pivot. But time to market really means how quickly can you improve your current value, which means how fast are we learning and adapting? How fast? That time to market is about feedback. It's not just how fast can I work and get something out the door. How fast can we actually take it so that we can test ideas with our customers? And what we want to do is minimize that time to market. So we're looking again at all these things holistically and how it balances in that key value area. And that time to market highly relates to our ability to innovate. So what is preventing us from delivering new value? How effective, I have here, are you at proving your current value? And what that means is not only what's preventing us, what's stopping us, like tech debt, from delivering new value, but what is preventing users from innovating? And so we looked here at those 4 key value areas, right? So we said, all right, 4 key value areas: current value, unrealized value, time to market, ability to innovate. And that was great. So we were talking to some customers and we're helping them implement this, and they were able to say, you know what, when I'm looking at this to make decisions with this model, this was really helpful because I thought that I could see that my current value was low. So my customers were unhappy, my employees were unhappy. So we found that they weren't really using the product. So we decided to add more features. It's common, right? And we said, wait a second, let's look at all these things holistically and let's see what else is blocking you from your time to market. And instead of just trying to make more money, we flipped it. And we were able to look at that usage index and the installed version index. And what happened was that the company found when they were looking in here, so all the manager wanted to do was make money and just see the ROI go up. And we said, wait a second, when we look at the installed version index, what we're finding is that a lot of your customers are on previous versions. And so they're not able to move over. And so you're paying a lot of money to support that. And by doing that, just a little bit of analysis, a little bit of number crunching when we're thinking about value, we need to focus on our ability to innovate. They did that and they saved $10,000 a month. That's great, right? So we're looking at that and we said, that's great. But what does that mean now? So what else do we do? So we say, okay, well, when you're thinking about value, how else would you break it down? Because they're saying, you know what, Patricia, this is nice, that story, we can save $10,000 a month, but we don't understand, we can monitor this, there's a dashboard, but really, how do we improve from this? What else should we be measuring? And how does that help us to be more nimble? And so there are companies that are saying, well, I really think that it's really great to measure time to market and ability to innovate, but we're not able to see how generally that moves the needle in current value. So it depends on how big and how much money that product is worth. You might not see a lot of movement. And we don't really know what value means for the customer. We still don't understand that. So we said, all right, how are you actually looking at measurements? So the 3 that I would talk about here is activities, outputs, and outcomes. So let's say an activity is I'm building a bike. The output is I have a bike, right? So I code, I have a release. The outcome is I can ride my bike to the store and be able to get home in 30 minutes with groceries rather than I need to walk all the way to the supermarket and get groceries and get back. Different kind of outcome of why I might want a bicycle. And we can think about this in terms of customer outcomes, how that changes behavior. Interesting. So we start to really focus on outcomes, and of course, outcomes might drive some sort of impact for the company, impact to the world, impact in terms of monetary return. But we start to really focus on this notion of outcomes. Are you focusing on outcomes? Because what happens is when you focus on a customer outcome, that current value now becomes very specific to your organization or product. So now we can talk about a current value and how that's specific maybe to a healthcare vendor, to, let's say, a restaurant. We can talk about how current value, what we measure and what we pay attention to, is very specific at scrum.org to somebody that's entirely different doing fintech, right? Different kind of things that we would talk about. So we started to explore the notion of outcomes. And the outcomes are really interesting because it drives us away from, there's a lot of focus on leading and lagging, but what we think about is if you're having outcomes that you're trying to reach and you're just articulating and you're just working toward those goals in an iterative fashion, that actually will tell us something because we're trying to do it quickly. So outcomes are something that the customer wants. And what I want to do is drive this a little bit more with you all, if I may. So if we think about the customer and we think about a feature, a product that they're using and the feature, we can see that this young woman, what she likes to do is she's just taking selfies, right? For me, it might be I'm just taking pictures of my food, or I'm taking selfies to send to my friends. So here's where I'm going to try to actually, step 1, interact with you guys so I can see you. But I want you to explore something. So I told you guys that we've been really expanding and working on the evidence-based management. One of the things, there's two things, so actually three things. So we have the guide that's been updated. And the second thing is you know, we've been experimenting with a workshop that's virtual for EBM. The third thing is that we've been working and are getting very close with evidence-based management, a professional agile leadership evidence-based management assessment and certification. So here's what I'm going to test and try out with you. So we're thinking about features versus outcomes, right? These are the things we understand what people want to do. Here's my ask of you. For people who can take a selfie of yourself attending this conference right now, you're watching my talk, take a selfie. I'm going to ask you to hashtag the conference ABE 2020 and tweet it at me at PMoonK88. Now, the outcome and the reason why you might take a selfie is because I have a proposal for you. For the 5 pictures that I receive that I think are the funniest, I will send you a preview of the EBM assessment and certification. So you will be able to try it. We're at that stage where if it's close enough and we flip the switch, you'll get the badge first, the certification. So my ask is, again, if you're interested, and it's a way actually for me to be able to see you too, is to take a selfie of yourself right now attending the conference. And I'm going to choose 5 of them, tweet them to me at PMoonK88. Chinese people just like the number 8. And send them to me. I will choose 5 people to get a preview of the certification for you first. All right. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds and see what happens on my phone, if anybody cares. Let's see what's happening.
I'm also looking at Twitter now. I will open the Twitter in another panel, and yeah, waiting for those pictures to come.
And if no pictures come, that's also information for me too.
Sure.
Sure.
So does it conclude your presentation, or do you have anything else to say before I jump to questions?
No. I still have a little bit more to go.
Okay, sure.
So
someone, by the way, someone just wrote, I care, but I don't have Twitter.
Well, they'll have to send it to Slack or Be and Gather or some other way. But I'm old-fashioned, I guess, old-fashioned now. So if anything comes through Twitter or something like that, the hashtag for the conference is ABE 2020. And you can tweet that at me to PMoonK88. I want to see pictures of you attending this conference. And that's an outcome, right? So we know that that's outcomes. And that is why when we think about this notion of requirements, they're not always rights for customers. What we care about is that outcome of what they're trying to do. So I can make this even more specific. So we just did, for instance, the outcome is I want to look beautiful. I want to look funny when I send this picture to Patricia so that she chooses me so that I can get a preview and I can test out the EBM certification. Cool. The other thing might be, and I've talked about this before when I worked with a client and they're in the healthcare industry, and their customers are doctors, and the doctors have to, in the United States, submit claims for insurance. And what they did was I said, well, what is the one thing that they want from your product? Well, really what they're trying to do is that they want to minimize the amount of time it takes them to process that claim, but maximize the amount of money that they get back. That's very tangible. So now we can see in real time, are we able to do that for them? Right, with that company. That's what I really mean by thinking about an outcome of what people want. So we said, that's cool. Think about outcomes, use empiricism, understand, continue until you're happy. So you have an opportunity, you have outcomes, look at the solutions, MVP, deploy and measure, measure using EBM, go get it, read these books. That's great, right? So that was our guidance. And then we started working on that. And we were doing all these different things. And we said, you know what, we should think about hypothesis-driven delivery. And we started to bring people through these exercises like this to make it real for them. So we would say, all right, so how would you use this when you're thinking about EBM? Well, if you're thinking about the persona, the person you're building for, they're thinking about this outcome. We'll know this is true when we see this measurement change. What's very important is that measurement changed on the bottom. So we said, all right, let's just run people through different exercises to see where they would go through. So I'm going to try one here with you all now too. In this virtual experience, if I was live, I'd be running around the stage and talking you through this. But let's say from one of our workshops, we talk about this organization we have called Gruber. So this is an exercise, pay attention. So we are working for an organization called Gruber. It's like Uber, a crowdsourced taxi business. COVID has happened. Rider revenue has dropped 90%, true story. So as an organization, what we've decided is that they want to use their technology. Gruber wants to use their technology to shift to the food delivery business. Makes sense, right? So we're trying to shift. Our key customer, Anya, wants to order food quickly with minimal risk of COVID transmission. So imagine all this stuff has happened where Gruber were saying, we're gonna move over and really focus on the food driver business. We've identified, this person who was always using Uber before, very comfortable using us for food delivery. And her number one concern, her outcome is she wants to order food quickly, but she wants to make sure that she doesn't have coronavirus. And this is very true in the United States, at least. Food would come in and we would all spray it and blast it with bleach before we ate it, because that's how we are. So here's my invitation to you. So let's just pretend, and I've done the work, we believe that allowing Anya to see if a restaurant has employees that currently have COVID will make her feel more secure. And her order volume will go up once a week. So if we build something that shows her this restaurant has 0 COVID employees, or this restaurant used to have whatever, right? But we probably want to see some sort of badge that just says COVID free. So however the back end, however the restaurants would prove that could be interesting. But let's pretend we're doing this, right? So I'm trying to help you go through this notion of what does this really mean if we were to apply it? So we have this activity, she wants to feel more secure, that's the outcome, but she wants to order her food. What would you choose to see if you could actually do that? So here what I've done for you is on the top of the dotted line, I've pulled some different time to market key value metrics. And on the bottom, I've pulled some ability to innovate key value metrics. My ask for you is to look at this. And what would be, if you were to choose one from each one, if we're trying to build this thing out, this little feature, what metrics would you choose? One from time to market and one from ability to innovate. So on the top, you have time to learn, which might be a little bit different. You have customer cycle time, which a lot of people are familiar with, and then mean time to repair. So that's the amount of time when work starts and it's actually released. And what's important to me is how this helps. So this measurement helps reflect an organization's ability to reach its customer. Time to learn is about what is our time to actually understand what we're going to do. And then customer cycle time is the organization, again, its ability to reach a customer. When we look at ability to innovate, we have the innovation rate, an on-product index, and technical debt. Again, I grabbed these randomly. So think about what is one that you would choose for each one. And this would be fun if we were together, but we're not. And so you're starting to get into that mindset, right? Thinking about how would we look at holistically the different areas. And we said that's super important, all right? So we have the value conversation. Now we're thinking about outcomes. And now we're thinking about holistically, how do you use that information to move forward as you manage and make decisions? So important. We don't want to localize in one area. We need to think about everything holistically and use that to make decisions. All right. And then what happened was this. So I was working with a lot of organizations and they would say, Patricia, we have all this information, but we don't know why we're doing it. We don't know how to move forward. And I think it's something that as people who work in organizations, work with teams, coaching, we all know that this is there. Sorts of things happen around focus and work in progress. But this is something that we started to add. And we said, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Is there a greater goal? Because when you're making these decisions, right? So now we understand how we can measure, we can make decisions. Where are we going with this, right? So can you attach it to a greater goal? How else could we think about it? Well, where are your sprint goals? What are they aligned to? What about your products, your product backlogs? Are those aligned? And if you don't know your strategic goals of what you're trying to do, what you can do is keep asking why. But again, this misalignment is happening. And again, when I was talking about before, this misalignment when organizations just try to scale. So they're saying, it's Agile, go Agile, we'll do this, that's really working well. Let's move the organization this way. The only thing that can protect you from that can create alignment is if you have a goal of what you're trying to do. And if your goal ultimately is just, we're going to become Agile, this is all going to get lost, right? So we're looking for those strategic goals of why are we trying to become Agile in the first place? What is it that we're trying to do? And as obvious as that sounds, I'm sure I've experienced and you've experienced, there's still a lot of people, unless you go up to the C-suite, they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. And it's not transparent and it's not visible. And so we're not alone. This is from Forrester Research, where it says developers are 6.5 times more likely not to know what the business priorities are. And they're less likely to focus on customer satisfaction, right? So they're deep into what they're doing. Okay, that's fine. And this is a little bit older, it's 2017. Hopefully this is improved, but those numbers are still pretty low from 2017. So that's when we added this. We said, you know what? We need to make this magic wand graphic and to really explain to people to think about this notion of goals. And that is really what started to make EBM this very empirical approach to start to think about continuous improvement. And we came all the way back to SIF because we said we took a little piece of it before, but all that thing around the goal and where you're trying to go toward, that was missing. And we started to add it back. I think organizations are ready for it right now. And so in the uncertainty that we already face in our industries and what's more that's being added, this is really giving us an idea of saying, there's a goal, let's be specific, let's make sure it's measurable. That's it, that's all I can ask for now. Let's get something big and let's think about the things that we can do to try to reach that goal. I'm not saying decompose it, I'm saying what are the different experiments that we can try to reach that goal. And when we think about goals, the way, and we've had this in the guide, we start to talk about them in terms of a strategic goal, intermediate goals, which are smaller goals that you might take to go there. What they also might do is tell you if you need to pivot. And then the tactical things that you might do. So if I was thinking about a strategic goal, just, random, let's say we have a disease out there. There's a global pandemic with disease. I'm sorry to bring up this example. And if you said, hey, the goal is to create a vaccine, that's a strategic goal, I would say, is it? Or is the strategic goal to try to get rid of the disease, eradicate it? And one intermediate way of working toward that to stop people from getting sick is to develop a vaccine. And then what kind of tests do we have to do? What kind of things do we have to isolate from a scientific perspective, right? How do we get up and continuously run experiments to try to see if we're more moving toward that North Star? And that's usually what a lot of other, in some other models, you might call it North Star. But when we think about these goals, these are the things that are important to keep transparent. When we were looking at the guide, I was wondering, should we talk about transparency? But every time when we were in an organization, that's what killed it. And now when we talked about measurements and behavior, and you align that with goals, you can have an entirely different conversation, right? So before, if we were driven down because what we were goaled on was defects, and what we were goaled on was this notion of, predictability, what we can say is actually, if we think about goals, this is what ties us together. This is very helpful for the scaling conversation. And so here we are today. And what's making it even more important today? And I think we know, right? So right now, again, more than ever, we don't know in industry, what's going to happen tomorrow. And there's a lot of different information out there. And what we're looking for is tangible ways to move forward. For me, when I think about that, that makes the conversation very important about how do we invest? So We're going to see, different downturns and upturns in the economy, but people are seriously asking, what does it mean for investments? I think that not only are we going to talk about investing and really thinking about that investment in value, which also brings up the goal conversation, but we're going to say, where are we very, very bloated? And when we think about this, this drives us away from the conversation, hopefully, of what do Scrum Master do? Are they worth it? Should we fire them all? Why do we need Scrum Masters? But really, how do we invest our organizations in certain areas? How do we get better? What is it that we need to do to try to reach those outcomes together? And how do we vigorously move toward that way? That was another reason why goals is really important, because of the portfolio question. So when we think about, we're working with the customer and we said, what is your goal? And when we said, what are all your projects? They showed us 60 projects. How many of those projects relate to that goal? 12. Wow, we just found a lot more available capacity and a lot more money that we can use, right? So that goal conversation is really important. And I think the bloat conversation is going to happen, and it should happen when we're actually pursuing agility, because people will see that overhead costs a lot of money. And so when we're really, really focused on our goals and how to invest, this notion of decision-making and how much that costs will be there. So this is some stats from the Chaos report, Standish report from 2018 about decision latency. And when you're making decisions and it has to go here and here and here and here, how much that actually costs an organization, right? Those are interesting things that we should be able to talk to and have a conversation together. So I've shared a lot of information. That's where we are now. What I've shared here is probably the first time I'm announcing at a big conference about the evidence-based management guide. So that's available to you. Again, this is all lined out there with additional metrics. And we have other white papers. EBM and portfolio is out there to think about how to pursue opportunities, how to invest for value. There's a lot of resources that are available to you guys. The Agile Measurement Open is a free assessment for you to try to take. We have case studies, webinars, white papers, and we're starting to develop this a little bit more, because I genuinely think that maybe now, unfortunately, is when organizations, and we haven't even had the culture conversation, but how we can tangibly start to look at, what improvement and value really means. So I do this because I'm from scrum.org. If you ever want to take a quick look at success and what that feels like, you can just walk in and see if these values are something that an organization represents. Do something good. So just like Scrum, EBM is shining a light on things. And besides what we need in our society, I think it's something that EBM and that what we're doing in our society can help us make a change for the way that we work, to make things a little bit better. And I know that what I'm going to end now, what I'm really thinking about now, besides the notion of how can we reinvest, redesign our organizations, how can we unbloat, is actually, now that we've talked about outcomes, how much is too much? That's what I'm thinking about. So thank you for your time. I have no clue where I am on timing. I hope to see some of your tweets, but feel free to contact me on LinkedIn.
You're perfectly on time. You're perfectly on time. And I've seen at least 10, the last time I checked, at least 10 pictures shared, just like you asked on Twitter.
Can I stop sharing my screen? Oh, I should probably keep it so people can come.
Yes, because the first question I have is a technical question, which is whether you will share the presentation you have just shown us.
If Andy asks me to share the presentation, I will share the presentation with you. I'm not using PowerPoint, so it might take me a little bit to convert it to be fully transparent.
So take time as much as you need and share it with, for example, in a PDF with the organizers, and we'll make sure it gets to the participants. Now on with the questions that are there. So the first question is, are metrics suggested by the EBM guide appropriate for all industries?
No. They're very, very, they're not very, actually we tried to lighten it, but there's this notion of obviously software in there because we come from that background. However, we do have organizations that are working with marketing teams, and they're saying, how would we convert and what would this mean for us? So they've actually gone through that activity as teams together and said, when we think about a campaign and develop a campaign and we're using Scrum and what does it mean? What is our ability to innovate, right? Because when you're in marketing, you usually have a really tight plan. What are those things that we would look at that would matter for us? And what I'm starting to think about is, I don't want to be a holder of all metrics, but is there somewhere, on the scrum.org site where we can start to think about, hey, these are cool metrics that you might use from your industry, some sort of wiki. What really is important to me is the context. I don't think that a list of metrics is great. There's other people who are really good at talking about metrics. What I care about is the context of how you're using it and what value you're trying to explore.
So the next one is unfortunately also about the metrics. Isn't customer cycle time and the mean time to repair the same? The descriptions were almost identical.
Maybe. If you're looking at mean time to repair and customer cycle time, to me, they're a little bit different, but the in and out the door, I don't know. What do you think, Andy?
I think the customer cycle time is from idea to delivery,
Yeah.
whereas mean time to repair is more related to defects. So there might be similar, but they are measuring slightly different stream of work happening.
What is common about them is the notion of making something available to the customer.
Yeah.
But it's looking at it from two different perspectives. I was just pausing there because I was thinking about, oh my goodness, did I copy and paste the wrong definitions? But I think what is the same is about the notion of making something available.
Okay. So how EBM, or would EBM, sorry, help me create metrics that are relevant for my company or team? Does it contain tools to develop them?
Does it contain tools to develop EBM?
To develop metrics. That's how I read this.
Yeah. So if I were trying to get started, what I would do is there's two things to think about. What is some sort of goal that we want to work toward? And the reason that I want to specify, this notion of what's a good goal or bad goal is because that will just get us locked for a long time. If I think about two ways that I could start, it either says, let's look at a goal and work toward that goal. And what are we going to measure to know if we're successful? The other way is that I would look at the 4 key value areas and I would say, man, do the best that I can. What's the one measurement that I could track in each one of those areas as we start to move along? The third way is if I'm really saying, do the best that you can, at a gut when you're talking in a team where you guys feel like you might be held back. Pick a metric there and start there. So if you think our time to market is really suffering, let's just pick 2 things that we could explore there. And so that in itself is your tool. And if you go into if you're not sure what you want to look at, just go down into the suggested metrics in the appendix of the EBM guide.
Okay, so another question, how are companies measuring technical depth? Do you know any examples?
They usually measure things like the companies that I work with, they're measuring defects, they're measuring time that the defects exist. Some companies are measuring, after a release, how many bugs are there, how does that hold them from putting in the new, in building new features. So there's a lot around the ability to innovate metrics that you can research there. But I don't think there's one common way that I've really faced because they're always thinking about it in the context of innovation. So they're mixing it together.
Okay. How does EBM relate to Tom Gilf's EVA method and his ideas around goal quantification, etc.?
There's some notions of goal that we've taken from there, but it's not really derived from that kind of thinking. The thinking that actually is really around EBM is, I would think about it from Toyota Kata. So this notion of lean and running toward experiments and going toward a certain way. People talk often about different models like OKRs and all those things. It's not really inspired from any of those things. It's really from 8 years of work of saying, how can we help organizations continuously improve, and thinking about what existed out there already and looking at what was helping and not helping with clients. There's a lot of other models that specify some great things, and ways that we can articulate goals, we can articulate, use models like SMART or all those things. But we said, you know what? We only want to think about what is necessary. And for us around goals, it was specific and measurable. And then what I think is really interesting is to say, how do you make those transparent, and at what frequency are you looking at that?
Okay. So those ideas can be complementary, I think, because yeah, that's just my 5 cents.
They absolutely can be. So that's our job as a kind of to say what's here, and then what else could you add?
Could you elaborate perhaps on any business value delivery metrics per products delivered by organization, perhaps even on sprint level?
So I should have talked about this more, actually. When you think about the magic wand graphic that I had, and I said, here's a strategic goal, and here is, we got to where we are at some point. So we are where we are currently, and we have a starting state. So we're where we are, and we're trying to reach toward these goals. Those intermediate goals might be releases. Those intermediate goals, or those immediate tactical goals, might be, every sprint review. And so when you're looking at that as an opportunity, I would say the measurements that you've defined in those KVAs would be what I would be looking at the reviews. And what, for instance, the example that I gave with the healthcare provider, what they looked at the beginning was they were saying, what is that one thing? And they went and did it for all their customers. What is that one thing that our customers want? It's not about if they were happy, actually. It was, what do they use our service for? How do we measure that? And it was already in their system. So every sprint review, they would start to look at, how is that needle moving? How are we making it easier for them to submit claims? Usually that threshold is they get paid about 80% of the money that they're asking for. Is that being met? It's the same thing when we look at, for instance, assessments and certifications. What is that threshold of people getting certifications versus pass rates and all those things? What is it that they want? And so we keep an eye on that, and then you have to correlate that. You correlate that with money or with costs. But I think the balance is to know, you may have super happy employees, but you're not getting any money. You may have super happy customers, but they're not paying you any money. And all those conversations have to happen some way. And again, the sprint level goal, is that aligned to, the product backlog? Is that thinking about product goals? Is that aligned to strategic goals?
Okay. So I have another question, which is,
I'm gonna drink more coffee. Hold on.
So I see EBM as yet another attempt to get management to measure and base decisions on evidence, but this is still relatively rare. So how do you think? Why is it so?
It is an attempt. I think it's an attempt to add transparency and to talk about something that's tangible, because when we see companies investing a lot of money into processes or into a lot of methods and frameworks around, we're going agile, we say, is that actually making you better? And when you can have the conversation with management, and I know a lot of product owners and product managers who do this, and Ralph Yoakum tomorrow is going to talk a lot about product ownership. And when you can bring them something tangible, that's a better way for them to make decisions than gut-based. Now, the question that you're asking has a lot to do, and it's very subjective, but it's that everybody kind of comes in with their own opinions. And so if we can say, hey, by doing this, we could save $10,000 a month, somebody's going to pay attention. And if they don't pay attention in their management, then, that's them being very flagrant abusive to how we're spending the money for an organization. I think accountability is a big thing. We're not ready. What could we do? So, when you sign as a manager or when you sign in leadership a very big check for something, you really hope that experiment runs well. So you're optimizing it for it to go well, but you're kind of not really paying up attention to the truth. And I think that this is a really great way when you can see when you're talking about sprint goals or other things, is that alignment of bottom-up intelligence to raise what's going on at the team level. What do we need? How's that going? And if that's all aligned, the rest is gravy. But there's a lot of things I think around behavior, around sabotage, around accountability, that all those things don't happen. And that's probably another talk. That would be my talk around power and status for next year.
Yeah. Okay.
In Poland.
Yeah, because we have. I mean, Agile practitioners and also sometimes consultants. We have this assumption that people we work with, they actually want their companies or teams to be better, but it might not be actually the case. But there might be different. They might be playing a different game.
It's the same thing with Scrum, right? I mean, essentially, yes. And it's why I have that quote by Ida B. Wells, right? We're here to shine a light on something, and if you don't want to, if there's not support, I mean, we're in a time where who knows if we can afford that, right? And that's why there's some impact here of what's going on in the world on organizations. What I would say is that McKinsey just did a study. And we did actually a joint survey with them. But McKinsey did a study, and what they found was that Agile organizations, if they have this Agile mindset, if they're working in an Agile way, whatever that means, have been able to pivot better in the time of COVID and with the different recessions that are starting to pick up. The other thing that we found from doing some research with them is that teams, they cared about two things. And the first thing was around product pride and customer centricity. And so if you take those two things together and you add, and you take those two things together and you say, wow, I want to have pride in what we deliver, what we do. I want to understand how I can improve that. And I want to be able to really keep the outcomes of the users in mind. There's a really great value. You're creating a great environment for value delivery right there. And that's based off of what people want. So you're free to ignore that, but you lose people and you lose customers.
And again, crisis is a good time for that, because it kind of verifies how good your organization actually is. Because there is a chance to remove some of the bloat you have been talking about. So just to close, the last thing is, could you say something more about this assessment that you have mentioned? When more or less it will be released, who it is aimed at, etc.
Yes. So for this assessment and certification, so there's a lot going on at Scrum.org, but for the assessment and certification, we're in our final round of testing. And we're testing with people who are outside of, let's say, the professional Scrum trainer community. And we're forecasting actually for October. Based off of the results, though, of the assessment, we'll see if that's true. They've been pretty good. It's an intermediate level assessment. So it's challenging, but we generally are looking at a pass rate, and what we're going to do is be scraping through, make sure the questions aren't too tricky, make sure it's not just a bunch of opinion, but it's all based off of the EVM guide. So those are things
who is the persona for the people who should take this exam, take this assessment to check their knowledge in this field?
Yeah. So anybody who's thinking about professional Agile leadership, and when I talk about professional Agile leadership, I don't mean this notion of you're a manager or leader only. I think of it as I am leading agility in my organization. So for us, what that usually means is there's advanced Scrum Masters, product owners, but a lot of coaches and consultants, and then generally we then hit portfolio management and that level of management there. So if you're looking for a person, it's usually program manager, Agile director, Agile coaches, and then some people from the team.
Okay.
But for me, I think everybody should take it, right? Why wouldn't you want to have evidence of what you're doing? And why wouldn't you want to challenge yourself to think in that way?
Of course, of course. But thank you for that. Thank you for your talk, and thank you for answering the questions.